Here we are in Avignon, the Avignon papacy. What are we doing here in Avignon? We're Protestants, we care about the Huguenots. I wrote Hammer the Huguenots. Part of it researching and writing on location right here in Avignon 5 years ago. You got to take your mind back to the 1300s and intensely relevant to today and to powerful people in both the church and in civil society have tried to make these power grabs over and over again. So go back to Rome and the Vatican and Boniface VIII in the early years of the 1300s, before John Wycliffe was even born yet, over in Yorkshire in England. Boniface VIII decides that he's going to try to make a power grab against all of the monarchs in Europe. In France, for example, that's the one that's most relevant, because he decides that he's going to make himself and the papacy superior to all the civil authorities. So all the civil authorities, the kings, the kingdoms throughout Europe, are going to have to come under his papal authority. Basically what he was trying to do was he was trying to expand the papal states to include all of Europe. He thought this was going to be a great deal. So he passes his edict in the early years, 1308, of the 14th century. And lo and behold, King Philip of France, here in Avignon, decides that he doesn't want to come under the authority of the Pope. So what does he do? He sends some of his soldiers down to Rome, to the Vatican, to arrest, to seize, to take prisoner the Pope, Boniface VIII. He's an old man by this time. He brings him back here to Avignon and he makes Boniface his prisoner, just to kind of make the point that he's really in charge and the Pope is not going to be over the King of France, no matter what provocation there is. Well, they let him go. Eventually he goes back to Rome, and in his poor health, eating too much rich food and so forth, drinking too much rich wine, he dies about a month later. What begins then is almost an entire century, 80 years or so, of the 14th century that's sometimes called the Avignon papacy. And it's where the King of France actually sets up the French cardinals, has the French cardinals elect a pope to sit at the Papal Palace, which is behind me here in Avignon. And meanwhile, the Italian cardinals elect an Italian pope to sit in the Vatican. So you end up with two popes, and at one point you even have four popes, all of whom are excommunicating each other, declaring anathema the others, declaring damned and going to hell all the other popes. So what happens is you have this great pre-Reformation setup for an utter embarrassment to what is supposedly the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. And some people who swim the Tiber and become Roman Catholics today say that, well, what we want is we want authority that's never shaking and never moving. Whoa, go back to the 14th century. And you had four popes, and they were all excommunicating each other. Who's the real pope? Who's the real descent from Peter? It really exposes the great problem of the Avignon papacy. Well, we'd have to go to the Council of Constance in 1415. That's where they began to, that's where they tried to correct the whole Avignon papacy, the Babylonian captivity of the church, another great schism of the church of the 14th century. That's also where John Huss was burned at the stake in Constance, and they decide in favor of Martin V for the Roman Catholic Pope, and ending the Avignon papacy. But what it does is it's a great setup for the Protestant Reformation and for the Huguenots here in Avignon.